Welcome back to Fantastic Descriptions. I'm Neil Aiken, and today we're looking at room descriptions. Originally, I planned to do this as a complete self-contained episode, and I realized after my first few attempts of recording this that there's still far too much information, and I'd rather break it down into a series. Let's begin first with an idea of what exactly is a room. So a room, in its strictest architectural definition, would be any space that is enclosed by walls, and usually one that has an entrance and therefore an exit. Now, obviously, within dungeons and within different fantasy settings, you might end up with rooms which have been walled off and sealed away. They still count as rooms. At some point, you enter them, hopefully, and discover something. So a room is an enclosed space there. And in this respect, it doesn't necessarily have to be within a home. It doesn't even have to be within a building or a structure. A maze might contain rooms. A labyrinth might contain rooms. A sewer might contain rooms. A dungeon, of course, contains rooms. But there are lots of different things that would be considered enclosed spaces, which therefore are rooms. So in this particular series, the next few videos are going to talk about the different things to consider as we set out to describe a room. I think the key thing to always remember in all this is that when describing anything, when we provide any sort of narration, the ultimate goal is not to show off or to dump information on the players. But it is a mixture of conveying information and providing a space or an opportunity for decision. So I think like that idea, those two twin ideas, which is that we narrate to convey information and we narrate to create an opportunity for a decision, a moment of action to occur. Those two things should be at the top of our list. Obviously, if you are entering some, let's say this is the fifth prison cell your characters have entered, and all the cells pretty much look exactly the same. You don't need to rattle off a description for every single cell that they enter and explore, unless there is something unique and different and important about this particular cell in which you do want to highlight. So I think that's an important consideration. Use sort of these descriptions judiciously, like carefully and sparingly, so that we don't wear out our welcome as a narrator, as a GM in this respect. Otherwise, we get what we, in one of my earlier games that I used to play in years ago, we used to refer to as the space bar, in which if you remember old computer games, role-playing games, whenever the narration or the cutscene or whatever would happen, there'd be a tendency to want to tap the spacebar to advance through all the dialogue to get to the actual action. And I think that's an important consideration. We don't want to wear out our welcome. So be clear, be concise, be engaging, and leave before, cut it short before we wear out their attention. When describing a room, there are 5 things in which we need to keep in mind. One is we need to keep in mind what is the first impression that the characters are going to have upon entering the space. So usually that is the most prominent or dominant sensory experience that's going to come to mind. So first impressions. Second, we need to convey where they are. And that might be in terms of its spatial relations to the rest of the complex that they're going through. It might have to do with where they are in terms of narrative. Does this room have a significance in terms of whatever plot path that they've been pursuing? Does it have a sense of ownership that relates to people or characters that they know? So on and so on. We'll go into more detail in a different episode on that. What's here, which is basically how do we describe what are the prominent features and contents of this room, and do so in a way that is informational without being overwhelming. Number 4, what's out of place? And I think this is a key one, which is given sort of after describing and setting the scene. Usually there's something that is out of place, something that is unusual or unexpected or missing, and that can often be like a focal point for the character's attention, usually the player's attention too. And then finally, we need to, often in our final sentence or final gesture, provide some hook or some bit of information that might arise as an epiphany as the characters take in the totality of the scene. They arrive at this one point, or they note something off in the distance or in a corner or some other place that is of significance that maybe they need to absorb everything first and then realize. So that might simply be like an all but hidden exit out of this room that's on the opposite side of the wall, or opposite side of the room. It may be some creature who has failed its stealth check and is currently hiding, but not very well, and they notice. Or it could be some other, maybe there's something glinting in the sand. Whatever it is, there is something in that room that they wouldn't have immediately noticed, but as they have started to back out in their mind and take in the totality of the scene, they notice one other thing, and that's kind of the Columbo effect. Sort of that, like, just one more question, and that one more thing is the thing that pulls them back in. And this could be the opportunity for a decision or a point of interaction that kind of pops up in that moment. Okay, so these are sort of that's the overview of things that we're going to talk about. And so, like I said, today we're going to focus primarily on first impressions. So when we talk about first impressions, we're talking about like the experience of entering into an unfamiliar space, usually an unfamiliar space for your characters. So they're going to be struck by a number of things that really will jump out. One might be the light. So like this has to do with darkness and brightness. So if you step into a room and it is unnaturally dark, that will be like if you've been traveling in light and you find a very dark room, or it feels darker than any other room that you've been in, that's going to pop out as being the first thing. Or unusual temperature difference. So there's a difference, and I guess maybe that would be sort of the key thing to think about. These are differences. So you step in, it is light, or it is dark, it is hot, or it is cold. You might notice air quality. You step in and it is muggy and humid in here, or it feels exceptionally dry and your throat begins to dry up. You feel parched and you find it difficult to speak. Or there's just a dampness in the air. You might be struck by a preponderance of a particular color. It just feels like the entire room is bathed in red. And that might be the case if you've happened upon a battle scene and there's just gore everywhere. And then sort of after the totality of that dominant color is hit, then you might move on to more specific details. They might be struck by a particular sound that is loud and dominates the entire experience before they figure out where it originates from. And then another feature or another thing that might strike them as part of their first experience here might be movement. Maybe there's something rapidly moving. Maybe there's an oscillating, maybe there's a clock pendulum, or there's a moving grindstone of some sort. They're in a mill. They're in something else where there's moving machinery. These type of things make noises, and they also make motion, and the eye is drawn to them. You might want to focus on perceived textures. So you step into the room and immediately you're struck by how slick everything is, or coated in something wet and slimy, or everything glistens as if covered in a sheet of ice. So these type of things can play a role in that first impression. More unusual things might be if they can taste something upon entering a room. And I think this is really almost never used. But there might be cases where there's something electrical or something acidic about the air, and it actually impacts the way that we taste the air. Another thing that you can use, and often it's paired up with like whoever's in the room, but doesn't always have to be, is number. You might step into the room and be overwhelmed by the sheer volume So the size or the number of things. So it might be you step into the room and you realize that this is a gigantic library, that every shelf is cram-packed full of scrolls and parchments and tomes of all sorts, and that the walls extend up 30 feet into the ceiling. You've never seen a room this size. So that sense of grandeur and size, or sheer number, that can be the first impression. And then you start to parse it. You start to make sense of it. So yes, the other thing that you can look at is scale, just size. Step into the room and it is very small and cramped, or you step into the room and it is spacious. It's a palatial bedroom suite, or that the throne room is grand and the ceilings are tall. So variances from whatever the norm is in the hallway or in the other rooms that you've encountered. If that's the thing, that's the big difference here. So I think the key then is to make notes for yourself in preparation for a session of what are the dominant physical or sensory experiences, like the sensory information they're going to get when they enter the room. So what senses get hit first? What is the dominant sense for this room? And you might just scribble it out on your map and just say, like, this is a visual room, or this is this is someplace where there's sounds, and then just brainstorm what those sounds or other elements might be. You don't need to list everything. You just need to give yourself a little bit of a map of what are the sounds, or what are the sort of the sensory experiences that dominate each room. And if you do that, your characters are going to step into those spaces and feel immersed, because what you're conveying to them, going back to our very, very first, or I guess the last couple episodes that we've talked about, it's consciousness. It's putting the experience and the description of their experience through the filter of their character's consciousness. What do they experience within their bodies? And if you can do that sort of second person style, so you sense or you feel or you see, you are inviting them to step more clearly and cleanly into that experience. If you keep it third person and objective, and you say the walls are straight and filled with green stones, there's a level of distance in that. But if you do the second person approach, you're going to allow them to feel like they're right in there as well. So I encourage you to do that, and I encourage you to think about what are the dominant sensory experiences for each room that characters enter, and keep a map. And we'll talk about that in the next one, why that map is going to be valuable to you. So I hope this has been helpful, and I hope you stay tuned for more episodes of fantastic descriptions. And if you enjoy this, please subscribe and like this video. Comment below if there are other things you would like me to tackle. And I'll be back again probably pretty soon with more episodes and more discussion about description. Bye. Then that's what you want to focus in on first impression. So first impressions focused on these type of things. And I'll provide a list in the comments, just kind of a cheat sheet for you to think about. So that's where we're going to end today, is focus on your first impression in the room. What happens when your characters step into the room? What do they notice first? And how does that impact the reading or their understanding of every other detail in the room?